So repackaged stories are multiple channels. Any story has to be figured out from the standpoint of producing it and distributing it on multiple channels to get your money through. Change website content daily. A website that is static is dead. It's not a website, it's a cobweb. And you don't want a website that looks like a cobweb because no one's going to go back to it once they've seen it once. You've got to change that content every single day. Stories to reflect expertise, write and produce content, tips for content. These are some things you can do. Curation of content today these days. So these are all different things you can do to create content. So with that, I think I'll stop. You're probably anxious for me to stop anyway. And then we'll see if anyone has any questions. Anyway, thank you. What does public relations mean to me? It means a lot of things because I write 600-page books on it. I always like public relations because it's an opportunity to share. It's an opportunity to communicate. It's an opportunity to help. So it means a lot. I make a living doing it, so it means a lot to my wife and our daughter in terms of money. Well, yeah. So let's have a question. Anyway, let's have a question about content.
Acolo era foarte întrebare? Adică să
nu.
What is the most striking feature of public relations law?
What is the most striking feature?
Yes,
I think the most striking feature of public relations today is what we call the word engagement. Engagement. It used to be public relations perceived as a kind of a one-way communication device, one way always pushing information. You know, we're always pushing information. And I think that's the old public relations that were continually distributing information. But I think today's public relations is how do we engage each and every one of you in a discussion or a conversation. Because social media, by its definition, means interaction. You're trying to encourage people to make a comment on your Facebook page or a tweet. You're trying to engage people to have a dialogue. And that's why you use blogs. That's why I use Twitter. And so a book was recently written. It was called The New Public Relations, putting the public back into public relations. Because the days are over now that you can only distribute one way. And the whole big part of public relations now we've got to realize is not only engagement, but the art of listening. You know, listening to your audience, listening to people, and responding to their needs as well as their concerns or their questions. And so public relations today is very complex. You have to, you know, strive for organizational objectives. You're not doing this for fun. But where companies bog down is the fact they're not responding rapidly enough to, you know, everybody thinks they need a Facebook page, right? Or they need a website, or they think they need Pinterest, or whatever link. But what companies don't fail to do is staff up for this. In order to react immediately to a Facebook notice, or to somebody, you know, responding or saying your company's really bad, you've got to have a staff that constantly monitors the internet. And you in Romania have that now, probably. We have in the United States. There's a number of firms that have what we call media monitoring services. And they're monitoring social media 24 hours a day. A good example of that is Dell Computer. Dell Computer at one time was getting a lot of bad internet publicity for lack of service. You know, lack of response about questions about the machine. And so sales started plummeting because the word was out that Dell was a bad company. Don't deal with it. Dell turned itself around and staffed up the whole media relations area, especially social media. And now today, when you say one word, pro or con, Dell Computer, you will receive a response from a company representative within 3 hours. Within 3 hours. Well, in order to do that, you've got to have a staff that can respond. And one of the things that happens is, you know, you probably have this experience, you know, websites always say, please contact us. And this is a you know, a nice lesson for you, or assignment for your class. Select 5 websites of Romanian companies. And where it says contact us or please contact us, contact them, right, you know, do the contacts and ask them a question. And see how long it takes for them to answer your question. Huh? Well, and if they don't answer, what do you think about that company? What's your reaction to that company if they don't respond? You don't like it, right? So you take 5 companies, find out the response rate. Because if the company, you know, says, please contact me, but it's only just kind of a lip service, you're making more enemies than you are friends. Because people are evaluating companies on very limited grounds. I wrote them a day ago and they didn't get back to me. So screw them, I want to buy this company. And so one of the biggest problems they have is that when you're going to get into social media, you're going to have to staff up for it. And so in America today, what we have, our companies are hiring, as part of their public relations staffs, social media managers. And their whole function of life is to manage social media. To monitor Twitter, to monitor Facebook, to monitor all the sites, all the discussion groups, about any comment about, and also measure what the audience is saying and what share of the conversation they have. See, on the media, on the social media, or the media, internet, you have conversation, right? Well, what company is getting the most conversation? And if you're working for a company, what share of the conversation about that product or that kind of product do you have? For example, on American media, social media, what athletic shoe company you think has 80% of the comments or 80% of the conversation? What?
Air Jordan.
Nike.
Well, basic is Nike. Well, which is Air Jordan. But Nike, for example, is 80% of the social media conversation. 80%. Can you imagine how powerful that is as a marketing device? 80%. Coca-Cola has something like 70% of the conversation about soda. You know, and Pepsi only has about 20%. Well, if you have that kind of conversation, you know, if you're working in public relations, and your company only has 10% of the conversation, what does that say about your company in terms of its effort? It means that you're not doing well. So you have to, you're monitoring constantly. You can do this by media. You know, Google has, you know, Google Analytics. There's all these measurement, methods that you can use. Google Analytics is used, Google Alerts are used. Do they know about Google Alerts and how to use it? Do you know Google Alerts and how to use it?
Google Earth, like Google Maps.
What? Google Alerts. You can put in a subject, say, I want everything that's about this subject into my box. So if you work for a company, all you have to do is put the name of the company and say anything on the internet about that company, I want my inbox, and that can tell you. So remember that, you're the new generation. You're the ones that are going to be using the social media and the internet more than me or her. You are the new generation. And your generation is going to consume information much differently than we do. I'm still a member of the Gutenberg Galaxy. I still read a newspaper. I read 3 daily newspapers a day, so that shows how old-fashioned I am. But you don't read newspapers every day, right? You just kind of read the headline. What's on your internet, on your smartphone. So let's ask more questions. What about the, yes, go ahead.
What would be considered as the biggest weakness in storytelling, and also when and how will you see its downfall come?
What's the biggest historical weakness?
Yeah.
Of what? Of what?
Of storytelling in terms of public relations, as a method.
Well, I think its biggest weakness is it's always been sort of associated with the dark arts, it's basically associated with manipulation and persuasion. And so I think the biggest weakness has been that this long historical association, particularly in Central Europe and Eastern Europe, about the use of propaganda, black propaganda or war propaganda per se. And so public relations still has this sort of imagery of the fact that we're always trying to, fool somebody or manipulate somebody. And historically, that's been true, because of the fact that we used a lot of hype and sensationalism in the past. But I think today it's different, because I think public relations is much more widely used throughout the world of business. It's much better understood. It's much better understood in terms of the marketing context. And I think, I think basically most organizations recognize that public relations, although they oftentimes call it corporate communications, is very widely used now throughout the world in modern business. For example, in America now, we always have these titles for officers, like we have a CEO, which means Chief Operating Officer, or CFO, which is basically Chief Financial Officer, or CMO, which is Chief Marketing Officer. Well, the new title now with the Author Page Society, which is a group of 500 senior professionals, Fortune 500, is called the Corporate CIO. It's a CIO, Corporate Information Officer. And so the CIO is trying to gain the same status as a CMO or whatever. And you got to remember that basically there's a convergence going on now. There's a convergence. It used to be public relations over here. We were the honest people, and the marketing people over here. They were dishonest. There's this merger going on. And that's why when we talk about brand journalism, we're talking about content marketing. We're talking a lot about the blurring of those lines. For example, in my university, almost all my public relations majors minor in marketing, which is a minor subject. I think about 5 or 6 courses. And so as you look at your curriculum, at the University of Bucharest, you're trying to figure out, how you can sort of merge some of these concepts of marketing and public relations together. Because I think, obviously, there's this blurring of lines and this convergence. Content marketing, the marketers say that brand journalism is a subcontext of content marketing. Some of us say it's been around a while. So basically, we've always had content marketing. We've always had brand journalism. We just put it in a new bottle. It's the same stuff, but we call it something different. You know, we've always been storytellers. We've always been storytellers. I mean, all of a sudden people say, oh, I'm a storyteller. You know, as if they discovered, you know, something new. Well, I don't know what to do about it. I think it's how we apply it in English. We're getting more sophisticated. Social science, psychology tells us about how people react and how they react to stimuli. So we learn more and more about how people react. And one of the things we know for sure is that engagement creates more brand loyalty than just an appetite. And we know that basically, from all the studies, is that the most credible source to you in terms of information is your best friend. It's your best friend or it's your family. That's the most credible source to you is that people you know. It's not some corporate spokesman, you know, that's a bit. So in order for me to influence you, I can't influence you, but I can at least expose you so that you are my representative and you talk to your friend about my product. So that's why engagement is the number one thing now. I've got to get a conversation going out there, you know, not out here. And I think that's the best part of public relations. Putting the public back into public relations is very important. But the old days are gone. You just can't write a news release now and forget it. Waste of time. Most news releases in America now are basically because of regulatory constraints, financial. You have, the companies are required by our law to report finances, so they have to do a news release. But you know, nowadays we have more interesting things to do. For example, a new product launch is that basically you do an event. You know, you do an event, or you sponsor it. You show up at trade shows, you show up at musical concerts, you do sponsorships. One of the things that most brands in the United States do now is that we have a festival called in Austin, Texas, called South by Southwest. It's sort of a rock musical sort of thing. All the big companies go to South by Southwest because the demographics are there. Chevrolet, you know, is trying to sell to younger demographics, so they show up at South by Southwest, and they sponsor a band. So, other questions? Yeah.
In terms of graphic communication, what do you think weighs more, static image or video?
Static image or video? Well, I think they're both rated highly. What we call now is called infographics. Video is very good because everybody likes cat videos, right? But what we have now is something called infographics, which is very big. Because almost anything that you want to do content-wise, you can put into a graphic of some kind. I subscribe to a guy in Spain. This guy in Spain, he's a marketing guy, but what he does is that he puts out every day about 6 or 7, I don't know where he gets them all, he steals them from around the world, infographics. And he has an infographic on it, sales of iPhones in the last 10 years. You know. And so if you can somehow create that infographic using color and making it simple, people grasp it 650 times faster when you do writing. And an infographic has more staying power than a video. The video kind of goes through, you can't remember exactly what it is because it goes, and then you have to review it again. An infographic probably is better for retention of information than a video. The video will go on and you have to look at it. An infographic you can stare at for a number of minutes. So infographics with using color, using very simple sort of designs, probably is more effective than a video. But it depends on what you're doing. If you want to get attention, you use the video first. But an infographic can put anything on an infographic, any content. you know. So one of the things that I do for my assignment for my students, I say, all right, write this news release. I give them a subject, I give them, you know, some data. And then I say to them, I says, all right, now that you've read the news release, prepare an infographic illustrating the basic information in this news release. Some of the stuff up here that I'm showing you is basically infographics too, you know. But infographics don't have to necessarily be facts and figures, you know, statistics. It can be just words. So what I do with my students, I say, okay, this is the basic news release. I want you to do an infographic on this news release. Then I want you to basically look at it from the standpoint of how would I prepare this same thing? What would I use for video? What would I use for graphics? Would I use a video or would I use a picture? Then I want you to prepare it for mobile, and I want you to mobile enable it. You have to enable a copy differently because it's on a smaller screen. So I try to take the same information, have them, you know, do 5 or 6 versions of it because that's the only way. It's a different platform. And it's kind of like what Bloomberg News does for its reporters now. Bloomberg News does coverage. Their reporters have to go out and do an interview. You know, interview for a story. Well, Bloomberg News writes a news story about it, writes a regular story, but they also videotape that interview and record that video audibly. So they not only have a written story, but they make a video clip out of it, you know, a 30-second video clip, and they also do an audio, so it's in 3 forms automatically. But the reporter doesn't do that. There's a staff back there, you know. So that's how I do it. So good infographics are very important. Any other questions? Any more questions? Yes?
What's your favorite public relations campaign?
What's my favorite public relations company? Is that correct? Campaign?
Sorry.
Oh, I have a lot of public. I've got a lot of favorites. Favorite one. I think there's a lot of classic ones. I'm trying to think of what ones they use in my books. It's hard to figure out a favorite one because they have to deal with what its effect is. You know, one of the favorite PR campaigns early on was, you know, basically go back to Edward Bernays. And Edward Bernays, you know, a long time ago, in the 1920s, came up with the idea of the Edison electric thing, where he convinced the world's electrical power companies to turn off the lights for 1 minute to honor Thomas Edison. I thought that's pretty neat. There's a lot of classic campaigns. Apple's kind of a classic way of doing public relations because Apple learned long ago that you don't use advertising. I'm not particularly fond of Apple as a company